the railroad in the 19th century in Europe, I think, is actually really interesting. And we could also talk about social media and the internet as other potential analogs. But the reason why I find it particularly interesting is we sort of underestimate how transformative it was for the average person, let's say, in Britain. They basically went from being in these fairly isolated towns with some capacity to basically travel between them, either like with horseback or carriage or something like these. But the railroad enabled much faster travel for humans. It was actually the fastest they'd ever traveled, right, when they got on the railroad. And the railroad stations went into these people's towns and brought random people, like large numbers of people into their towns, and also industry through their towns as well. And in the early days of the railroad being built, it was actually extremely contentious. So the wealthy aristocracy basically opposed it on the grounds of they just like not wanting railroad tracks going through their land that they felt like they had ownership over. And then on the other end, sort of more sort of working class types. I mean, a lot of times the station would just go in right in the middle of their town where they lived, and it was unbelievably loud. It was bringing all these people they didn't know right into the middle of where they lived. It made them feel unsafe. And there were a number of high-profile accidents where the train would just come flying through and just smash into something, and lots of people were injured. And the reason why I bring this up is basically the risks were actually quite serious. It was actually extremely disruptive to the day-to-day life of many people, and there was resistance. So there's several interesting examples where basically like aristocratic types would basically oppose the railroad track going in. Again, more of the working class type people, in multiple instances when a new station was opening, would stand and block the way of the train as it was going in. One interesting side note I would put here is that this was not the case in America when the railroad went in. The reasoning there being, I think in America, there was this like, manifest destiny thing was going on. And we also, in America, we sort of wander outside and stare at the moon, I think a little bit more.
The United States, like it was a much bigger area to cover.
Exactly. So it was less disruptive. It was more about forging something new versus disrupting something that already existed, right? Yeah. And so this is why I think the railroad in Europe is a pretty interesting analog. So one other thing that's worth noting is that the media and doctors were actually circulating large numbers of ostensibly fake stories about trains. They talked a lot about madness that would emerge from. So somebody would stab somebody on a train, and the doctors and media would say that it was sort of the jogging of their brain and the rattling on the train made them go insane, and it caused the stabbing. But of course, it's just humans get in fights. And it was just a fight that happened on a train and somebody got stabbed. And similarly, a lot of the headlines would describe the trains as shrieking and demonic. And there was a lot of this sort of language initially used. And so it's a classic like Luddites versus accelerationists sort of type dynamic.
I bet you're a big fan of the Pessimist Archive, huh?
I'm not familiar actually.
It's a great compendium of all these sorts of stories.
Yes.
The radio is turning your daughters into whores. Yes. The rifle will allow the engine to kill all the white men. These sorts of things. I think these exaggerated examples from the past. Obviously, we see it now, right? Like AI is going to kill us. By 2027, we'll all die, right? Yeah. Although that's not what the 2027 paper said. But anyway, that sort of idea, we're all going to die. That would actually be quite relieving.
That's not the right
lot of the anxiety. A lot of the anxiety would be relieved, and we would know then what was up. We would not only know what was up with AI, we would know what was going on with the afterlife, and we could all do it together rather than just one at a time, which is really not fair to get singled out.
You and Peter Thiel should grab a drink sometime.
Is it better for humanity? But that's probably not going to happen. And so it's very similar to climate change in the sense that climate change sucks up all the oxygen in the room, and the problems of species loss, the problems of habitat loss, and the problems of pollution kind of lose a lot of the public attention that they should have, because these are things that you can see very clearly and you can measure very clearly. Climate change models, let's just say that's a little bit more hypothetical. And in the same sense, like the major problems, the immediate problems of AI, I think, are going to be, again, it's already evident, the psychological and social impacts. What does it mean when human beings begin to become companions with machine teachers. You look to the AI as the highest authority on what is and isn't real. And you train children in this global village of the damned to become these sort of like zombified human AI symbiotes. And then beyond the social ramifications of that, and having like you trained your AI on your grandma, right? And everything's given, like your grandma's there, like, you know, bitching about the mashed potatoes or whatever, you know, on a screen, on an iPad. You know, these sorts of things. How far will it go? Don't know. How far did opium go, and fentanyl, and OxyContin? How far did porn go? Pretty far. Beyond that, though, you've got the economic concerns, and it's all really up in the air, right? Is AI going to make your company more competitive? Is AI going to replace all your workers? I mean, you look at Klarna, and they made this big announcement: we're replacing all our workers with AI in customer service, and then they were like, oh, actually, we're hiring again because they didn't work out so hot. Maybe it'll be like that, or maybe it'll be more like companies like Salesforce or Anthropic, where the coders really are being replaced. The low-level coders are being replaced. But these economic concerns, and I think for you guys, especially for you, Bryce, the economic angle is clearly you take it very seriously. And I read the Volus mission statement that doesn't include anything. I mean, it's like basically a rejection of the whole transhumanist vision, right, subtly, but a subtle rejection of it, but an embrace of these technologies in their more, I guess, humble forms, you know, like low-level forms and narrow forms. And it makes sense, but I really think ultimately, though, that long-term vision, because these are the frontier companies, right? And they're driven by the long-term vision. They got all the money, and they've got the government support. And they're, you know, the carousel of the federal government has now given favor to Meta, has given favor to Palantir, has given favor to the whole A16Z stack. Their vision of the future is going to make a big difference, kind of regardless of the technology. Like, people have been able to hypnotize whole tribes by like waving totems around, like ooga boot, you know. And it's like, if you can do that, and you've got a totem that can actually, you know, talk and do math, you're talking about a religious revolution beyond anything that's been seen before. And I think that all of those things, like all of those problems, are just beyond the scope of like the nuts and bolts day to day. Like, does my AI give me a nice streamlined PowerPoint for my presentation?
Right. Like, I understand there's been fear-mongering throughout the ages, whether it's Phil and I talk about the synthesizer sometimes. You're talking about the trains. The thing I think that sets AI apart is that it is a vector for almost everything about humanity. You know, it's about education, it's about children and safety, it's war, it's going to be expression with regulations where they're trying to say you can't do deepfakes and whatnot. So it really, everything kind of falls into the black hole of AI and becomes a much bigger existential crisis. Although I understand existential crises that the Luddites, who I agree with, because they were afraid, they weren't anti-tech. They were more anti being replaced by mass autonomy. So they were still using their own technology of the day, the OG Luddites, but they didn't like that factories were being built and filled with machines that took everyone's jobs, right? And that is just one part of what AI will be doing.
I think the point of that story was to highlight basically that there were serious risks and things went wrong. And humans got on top and figured it out and solved it. They moved more of the stations further out from the city. They put in place better safety measures on the trains, et cetera, et cetera. You're absolutely right that AI feels like it is more transformative and the risk profile is potentially higher. I don't think we're quite there yet, but it's definitely in the future it could get significantly more risky. I would say one risk that exists today, and this was something that I ran into directly, is for example the sort of the way that AI can allow people today to sort of mass scam Americans, right? So I got this email from a guy named Akshat, who was
king in Ethiopia.
No, he's a man in India.
Oh, okay.
And he was sending 40,000 emails today, but they're extremely well tailored, right? In the email he mentioned portfolio companies that we work with, names that I recognized. Ooh. It was a very well tailored email, and it was generated using an LLM. He's blasting out tens of thousands of these. And essentially, in this case, Akshat was basically offering us to offshore our labor, so our associates at New Founding, for a quarter of what we're currently paying them, right? And he's able to do that, and it's not just using MailChimp, right? He's basically collecting data in order to produce the right sort of targeted email. And I mean, essentially, it's a form of scamming that's that's using AI in order to be more effective. And you can think about how this could apply to, like, if that was targeted at your grandmother or something like that. And so I think that's, like, very practically today. It's about blocking people like that and making sure that AI, very practically right here and right now, isn't used to harm Americans, while we continue to monitor these further out risks. But it's also important not to confuse the two.
And to that point, I think when we treat AI as kind of some autonomous, or it's some technology, like it's a train steamrolling and we either get off the tracks or we take it, I think that's the wrong way to think about AI, because that treats it as something that we're powerless, we're completely passive. And I think there's a lot of doomerists out there who want to talk about the deep state and the globalists, and we're just a tool, we're a cog in their machine. And that takes away the agency that actually is what makes humans different from AI. So I guess I would actually want to add maybe spin a positive vision for what AI could be. And I think part of the way to solve the AI problem, to define that narrow path for the future, is actually for people to start building things using AI appropriately that actually make America better. And I think what does that look like? Well, there's kind of there's the fear that AI actually enhances this military-industrial complex. That's fair. I think AI is actually very different from a lot of technologies that have come around, like the airplane, like the computer, like the internet. All these have been started as military technologies. And that's actually kind of their natural bent, is as military tools. And then they trickle down to large global enterprises, and then finally to consumer applications, right? But AI, interestingly, its first application, at least when we're talking about large language models, is actually for individual people to help make their lives better, to reduce monotonous work. And I think the way I see it is that AI is going the other way around, that we can actually use AI effectively in small businesses, where humans who are really high agency, virtuous, good leaders can actually get more done, and they can have more success with AI because they're able to get higher leverage.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.